Welcome to Straight Up, brought to you by Peak Prosperity, which values context, curiosity, and learning that leads to action. Reading from his latest works and expanding on current events in the economy, energy, and environment, it is my pleasure to introduce your host, Dr. Chris Martenson.
Welcome, everyone, to this Straight Up. I'm your host, Chris Martenson. Thank you for listening today. It is Saturday, July 27th, 2019. Overdosing on crazy pills. If you think everything's okay, you're nuts. Sometimes an otherwise forgettable movie will be lifted up out of obscurity by the internet and made into, well, a useful meme. In the movie Zoolander, Will Ferrell's character, Jacobim Mugatu, screams the line, "I feel like I'm taking crazy pills," because it seems nobody else sees what he does. Now, I have that feeling nearly every day now, and it's getting more frequent and more intense, to the point where some days I feel like I'm in danger of overdosing on crazy pills. So here's crazy pill number one. Look, financial bubbles happen. History's full of them. It's just that they're not supposed to happen more than once a generation. You have to forget about things before you do them again, right? How can so many people have completely forgotten the painful lessons of not just one, but two recent bubbles, right? The bursting of the dot-com bubble in 2000, well, that was traumatic. And the bursting of the housing bubble, so-called, in 2008, well, that was even more traumatic. And back in 2000, eyeballs were favored for a time over earnings, right? Eyeballs, that's how they were measuring. That's how they were rationalizing otherwise irrational investments at the time. They were saying, look, don't worry about if Pets.com is making money, that earnings thing. That's so old school. Look at all the eyeballs they have on their website. That somehow more eyeballs were going to translate into more money, right? But eventually the investors of the time woke up to the fact that all of their rationalizations for the sky-high valuations of profitless companies were actually ridiculous. Okay, fine. Lesson learned. Earnings are actually important. But here we go again. Less than 20 years after the dot-com bubble and only 10 years post-subprime housing bubble, both far less than a full generation later, to allow the keepers of the memories a chance to, die off, with exactly the same dynamic in play. Now, the piece at my website at peakprosperity.com shows a chart, and it shows the percent of initial public offerings or IPOs that have negative earnings. So that's saying if you had 100 IPOs come out and you had a reading of 50%, half those companies have negative earnings at the time they're being offered to the public. Now, in the pre-financialization era that ended a few decades ago, a normal mix would have been roughly maybe 15% of IPOs with negative earnings, but 85% would have had positive earnings, right? We've taken this company, we've proven it is successful. Now we're bringing it to the market. Would you like to get in on the ground floor of Microsoft, of Apple, or something like that, right? So IPOs can be great, but it really helps if they have earnings. So in this chart, what I'm showing is that there's two really standout bars where it shot up to right around 80% of IPOs had negative earnings. And the first time that happened were in the years 1999 and 2000. So that was crazy time, right? We remember, right? We all think back, oh yeah, but Chris, that was then. That was nuts, obviously. Wouldn't do that again. But today, it's the same number. We have around 80% of the IPOs that went out in 2018 had negative earnings, okay? And we're probably on track to do that same number again this year if things keep going the ways they are in the first 6 months of 2019. So things are just the same as they were in 2000. So by way of example, let's look at some recent IPOs. Let's look at Uber and Lyft. Both companies, they aren't just unprofitable, but wildly so. The more these companies make in revenue, it seems, the greater the accompanying losses. I got a chart here that shows Lyft, L-Y-F-T, Lyft, the competitor to Uber, that they lost more than a unicorn in the latest quarter, meaning more than $1 billion. There's two lines. One, revenue. Yeah, nice green line. Revenue is climbing. But under that, if you look at their net profits, negative, in the negative territory, and there's a red line there tracking those that goes down. So the more Lyft earns in revenue, the more they lose in profits, right? This is the very essence of a broken business model. It's no different. Literally exactly the same as a circa 1999.com losing gobs of money on a pie-in-the-sky business scheme that sounded great, sounds really good. That sounds amazing, but it didn't actually work, right? No matter what happens here, though, we're seeing that Lyft's stock price is just been going up basically since well, it had a little rough spot right at the IPO moment, but it quickly rebounded and recovered. It's past that now. So this company that loses money every quarter and loses more money the more business they conduct is now worth, with air quotes, it's worth, according to the market, $18.9 billion. This thing is a cash-burning furnace, and the market has said, in its infinite wisdom, hey, that company's worth $18.9 billion. So Lyft's stock price here just keeps going higher, no matter the losses. Maybe because of them, maybe in spite of them. Maybe it has nothing to do with it. We don't know. One can only imagine how much higher it's going to explode, though, if Lyft manages to somehow turn in slightly less than negative as last time earnings next quarter. I mean, wouldn't that be a positive, right? We're losing, but not as fast as you thought. People, what matters during an asset price bubble is not the rationale, but the rationalizations. Things aren't rational. They are rationalized here. Uber and Lyft are, quote unquote, transforming transportation and, quote, reducing urban congestion. Even though, I don't know, taxis already existed and there's zero evidence that they're reducing urban congestion, because you look at something called deadhead time. That's the amount of time that an Uber or Lyft driver is wandering around as the only driver in the car, the only passenger, as they go towards their next fare. That actually doesn't reduce congestion. That actually adds to congestion in that example, or is at least neutral. All right, so the rationalizations don't matter. Wolf Richter, who I love, we have him on all the time, is a podcast guest on our Insider Off the Cuff. You should try and come check that out. He's fantastic. He put it really well in a piece recently where he said, quote, talking about stocks here and what's going on in the stock market, quote, anything goes. Story stocks, momentum stocks, hyperventilation stocks, consensual hallucination stocks, and financial engineering stocks that generate mind-boggling share prices that give these companies incomprehensible market capitalizations, and the mere mention of fundamentals gets naysayers ridiculed and thrown out. It's like the whole market has gone nuts, end quote. So the full quote that actually goes with the meme, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, that line that's delivered by Will Ferrell's character in Zoolander, it actually starts, doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. So it's, doesn't anyone notice this? Right? How can people not notice what's going on? All right, let's talk about crazy pill number 2. I keep reading articles where hapless financial journalists try earnestly to make sense of a world that is now completely senseless. It must be super frustrating, right, to see the impact the central bank bubble is having on distorting all the markets, but your editors disallow you to point any of that out to your readers. That would drive me nuts if I was in that position. Actually, I couldn't do that job. I was reading a recent Wall Street Journal article which noted that investors poured lots of money into bond funds, actually at a record pace in the first half of 2019. And the article then went on to try and explain this. So what did it say? Well, it explained this as a sign that investors might be cautious about the economy. Sure, probably a fair conclusion during normal times, but not when crazy pills are being served buffet style by the world's central banks. Instead, we have to note something different, which is that, yes, the world now has a whopping 13.7 trillion, actually as of today, this morning, Saturday, I wrote this article on Friday, on Saturday, more than $14 trillion of negative yielding bonds, meaning record high bond prices, because those two work in opposition, right? So negative yielding bonds means a really expensive bond in terms of prices, right? We have that condition. We have 14 trillion in negative yielding, super expensive bonds, and we have negative earning IPOs, both at the same time. They're both existing simultaneously with each other. Now, when investors are cautious, they move out of stocks and into bonds. That's what the journalist was grasping for, that idea that people are worried about the economy, so they're taking money out of stocks and they're moving them into bonds, right? Taking their monies into bonds. But that's not what's actually happening right now. Money is flooding into both stocks and bonds. It's currently a risk on and a risk off environment, which means it's actually neither. It's a bubble, a magnificently deformed time of monetary excesses. We're currently witnessing a massive blow off top that will end in something probably, honestly, kind of akin to the Dark Ages, a time of systemic breakdown, and maybe we'll be lucky to preserve the pinnacles of our current technological achievements, but maybe not. People who lived after the Romans decamped from Europe, England at the time, hundreds of years afterwards, they were still marveling at, like, who is this crazy race of people that managed to build these amazing roads and these awesome stone houses with these heated baths and things like that. These achievements were lost for hundreds of years as technological achievements. That's what happens when you have a big sort of a crack up in your civilization narrative. Now, let's save more of that idea for later. To make the bubble claim, though, really just a little bit more concrete, because I say bubble a lot, and people I'm not sure exactly get me. So let's burrow in a bit, and I say 14 trillion of negative yielding bonds. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. Do you know how big a trillion is? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody can grasp that, right? As I've pointed out in the crash course, a trillion, if you had a $1,000 bill and you had a stack of them 4 inches high. So this is a stack. Solid stack of $1,000 bills, 4 inches high, you'd be a millionaire. And to be a billionaire, you'd have a stack of those 328 feet high. But to be a trillionaire, you'd have a stack of $1,000 bills that's 69 miles high, right? So those exponentials that get away from you quick, right? 4 inches to 328 feet to 69 miles. Chris, you must have messed that calculation up. Trust me, I didn't. It's been done over and over again. So that's what a trillion is. So who can make sense of a trillion? I can't. You can't. Nobody can. So let's burrow in a bit. Switzerland. Let's look at Switzerland. They got cuckoo clocks, they got cows, and they got banks. Switzerland's government bonds now. Let's look at that bond market. That's going to serve our point here. Here's an article I'm reading. It's out of Reuters from July 25th, just a couple days ago. The headline is Swiss 50-year bond yield falls below 0%. Entire Swiss curve now negative. And they're talking about the Swiss yield curve. So every single government bond that Switzerland's offering that you might buy now sports a negative yield. Quoting from this article, it says the 50-year yield fell 2.6 basis points to minus 0.014%. That's not a lot, but it's still negative. Pick any Swiss bond of any maturity, and get this, you have to pay the Swiss government for the luxury of lending money to the Swiss government. Do you get that? I mean, this is a tough sentence to make sense of. It's crazy pill time, right? That's what we're talking about crazy pills. So in the case of the 50-year Swiss bond, you'd pay $1,000 today to the Swiss government. You'd lend them your $1,000. And what they would do is they would pay you back $993 in the year 2069. Think about that for a second. You give $1,000 today to the Swiss government, and in the year 2069, they'll give you $993 back. Come on, crazy pill time. How do you even make sense of that, right? You can't. Heck, look, even if the bond was paying 0% versus this negative amount, which is hard to make sense of, but let's go with 0 for a second. That alone at 0% means that your money literally has no value, right? If I give you something and don't care if you give me it back or all I want is, I just want you to give it back to me in 10 years. Like, I'm going to lend you my smartphone. Here you go. Have my phone. You know what? In 5 years, give it back to me, right? That effectively tells you I don't value that phone. It has zero value to me, right? So that's what it means if you have 0%, you lend somebody your capital, your hard-earned money, you lend it to them at 0, it means it has no value to you. So what does it mean when you lend it at a negative rate? Right? That means it has less than no value, but it clearly has value. You can spend it today, but in the future, I want less of it back. You can't. How do you make sense of this? I can't make sense of it. It's ridiculous. Okay, I could possibly make sense of all of that if I knew for certain that the amount of circulating money was going to fall over the time that I'm lending you that money, right? So I would know that there would be fewer claims against more things over time. That is, I'm expecting heavy-duty deflation. But we're not in a deflationary environment. We're in the exact opposite world, with global central banks easing like mad right now, promising even more. Hey, rate cuts. Oh, more QE if we have to. Let's make some serious comments about maybe buying equities directly. Or maybe they'll just print up money and distribute it via MMT. Listen, the central banks have promised in word and deed that they'll do whatever it takes to avoid deflation. So whoever's buying these bonds at negative yields is betting that deflation is going to win, but they're fighting literally the entire central bank apparatus, which has said deflation can't happen because we can always just print money anytime we want, right? So against this entire backdrop, what can we make of the hundreds of thousands of individual investors that are actually buying the Swiss 50-year bond or any of the other 14 trillion negative yielding bonds, right? If they hold that bond to maturity, they're going to get less money back than they put in. And the purchasing power of that money is going to be seriously diminished because there's this thing called inflation over time. What sane person would make that deal? Again, doesn't anybody else notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here. Which brings us to the biggest crazy pill, and that's number 3. By far, the largest crazy pill I am taking, or being crammed down my throat, it's a horse-sized one. It feels larger than my throat. It's not going down. Concerns the serious consequences with society's addiction to perpetual economic growth. Edward Abbey, he said it best here. Quote, "Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell." End quote. Think about that. Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. Well, that's what we've got now. There's nothing wrong with growth per se. I don't mind. You grow productivity. We're going to grow our knowledge. We're going to grow as individuals. Look, there's nothing wrong with growth per se, but if it becomes your economic mission instead of just a strategy, then it's cancerous. It's self-destructive. Virtually nobody in power ever questions the need for economic growth. It's a universally understood imperative, especially among the banking class. Despite already having supremely frothy stock prices today and negative bond yields that require mega doses of crazy pills to even contemplate, the world's central banks are desperately scrambling to justify easing more. That's what they're doing today, to drive stock and bond prices to even frothier heights. Okay, but for what exactly? What's so urgent right here and now about getting even more growth? Look, in nature, seasons come and go, right? The sun rises and then it sets. But if it were up to central banks, I get the sense that the sun would stay perched at its midsummer noon apex forever if they could do that, right? Think of the corn yields, Chris. Maybe the central banks would like it if we could invent a pill that would then banish sleep in our day without nights, Think of all the extra productivity of the 80-hour work week, It's so unnatural what they're trying to do, which is to achieve perpetual growth forever without a resting phase and without any sense of the limits involved. It's perverted. It's unnatural. Meanwhile, just casually scanning the headlines, we notice multiplying ecological breakdowns like these. These are all headlines. Headline 1, July is on track to become Earth's hottest month on record, climate scientists say. Headline 2, phosphate shortage, the dwindling resource required to grow food. Headline 3, Russia alarmed by large fall in bee populations. Oops. Number 4, EPA restores broad use of pesticide opposed by U.S. beekeepers. Oops. Number 5, precipitous fall in Antarctic ice sea ice since 2014 is now revealed. 6, we're not fixing climate change. 7, wild bee species critical to pollination in steep decline. Next, plummeting insect numbers threaten collapse of nature. Next, Chennai, India is running out of water. Other cities will be soon. Last headline, only 60 years of farming left if soil degradation continues. Now look, it's the end of the headlines. I could go further, but individually, any one of these, maybe you could explain it away as a fluke. But collectively, I mean, they clearly shout something's terribly wrong with the natural world resulting from our current monomaniacal pursuit of growth. That's our mission, right? That's what we're going to do here. The current trajectory of the environmental data, look, it's frightening, right? If those headlines didn't frighten you, you got plenty of crazy pills in your body. Don't take any more. Look, people are either aware of all this ecological data I've put out, they're ignorant of it, or maybe they're in denial about it. And some people are purposely, willfully ignorant about it, meaning they say flat out, I don't want to know that stuff, Chris. It's too depressing. So they don't want to know about it. But that's kind of like saying, gosh, I don't want to know about that lump I just found under my skin over near my breast. Or, hey, I don't want to know why I've got these 3 lights, check engine lights on. Let's just put some black tape over them. You know what? I've actually done that before to one that drove me nuts, but that's a side story. So I get it. I get why some people are in denial about it. Look, I'm certain I'm in denial about some things in my life too. It happens, right? But anybody of my age, I'm mid-50s right now, who spent time outside as a kid or has noticed the recent dearth of insects on the screen door on summer nights or on their windshield after a long drive through the summer skies to get to a destination, we can see, if we choose, with our own eyes from our own experience set, how the natural world of insects and migratory birds has been collapsing. Doesn't anybody else notice this? Right? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here. To me, it's just a simple statement of fact to say that the economy is a subset of the natural world, not the other way around. No ecology equals no economy. No oysters in the bay means no oyster fishery. No soil means no farming. But the way things are currently configured within every political and financial institution, along with their compliant media prostitutes, the one and only goal is more GDP growth, which means more throughput of stuff. Resources plus energy plus a little human effort equals more stuff. When times get tough and GDP starts looking like it might fall, the state freaks out, floods the world with more money and more credit to cattle prod the economy back to health, as they say. They got it backwards. The implicit, if not explicit, assumption contained therein is that some sort of salvation or broad social good results from perpetual GDP growth. Now, I understand how they got there because that was coincidentally true during the 1700s, the 1800s, most of the 1900s. As GDP grew, people became more prosperous. We learned a lot of things about medicine and transportation and other technology. So coincidentally, as the economy grew, people did better. But it's absolutely not true anymore in the 2000s. The blind pursuit of growth is now diminishing rather than enhancing society's prospects. But the keepers of power have not managed to adjust to this new reality. Well, at least not publicly. Though you should see the number of rich people that we know and high-level government institutions that are preparing for massive disruptions by building world-class bug-out shelters and stocking up years of provisions. And you know what? You might consider doing the same, just in case. I certainly have. The conclusion of all this is being at peace with today's status quo, it requires taking crazy pills, lots and lots of them. Such is the nature of late-stage bubbles. It's also true that of the nature of civilizations that have run their narrative past the breaking point. Late Empire Romans needed crazy pills to believe in their emperors. The Aztecs needed crazy pills to believe in their leadership when they embraced Cortez. Towards the end, The leadership of a dwindling civilization isn't the cause of the decline, but reflective of it. Once the narrative thread no longer makes any sense, having defective leadership is kind of a requirement. It's a feature, not a bug. It's something the culture demands in order to keep the perceived and perverted status quo going. And this explains, in part, why I'm strictly apolitical at this time. It matters not to me one slight bit whether it would have been Trump or Clinton in the White House. Either both would have been similarly defective leaders, maybe for slightly different reasons. We're just so badly off the rails at this point, our political system reflects that. Similarly, look, I'm agnostic about who heads up the central banks around the world. Draghi of the ECB was loathsome, but Christine Lagarde, she's not going to be any better. Jay Powell certainly speaks more clearly than Alan Greenspan, but literally no different. Thinking of the central banks, stop me if you've heard this one before, right? Today, we have a small cabal of unelected officials, many without any real-world operating experience, such as starting and managing a productive business, setting the prices of not just money, but of every financial asset. And then after they serve the public, they then rotate into the exact same banks and financial firms that most benefited from their service. I mean, how is that any different from the way the Soviet Union set crop targets and prices? It's just not. We literally have self-interested, communist-style capitalism in our banking and monetary policies. It's ridiculous. But look, the bottom line is this. Nothing in this story is going to change until the system breaks. Look, guaranteed, 100% guarantee that somewhere between here and 2069, when that Swiss 50-year government bond comes due, interest rates will either be very far north of minus 0.014%, and or the Swiss franc and other fiat currencies will have become worthless. It's a further guarantee that more cities, and possibly entire countries, are going to run out of fresh water. Agricultural soils will become vastly less productive. We're going to be way past peak oil by 2069. And yet, there are investors buying 50-year Swiss bonds because they have something in their head that says a certain amount of crazy pills they've taken, which allow them to think, you know what? This investment is going to work out for me. This is awesome. I'm buying it. Minus 0.014%. I better buy it before it goes to minus 0.05%. Or I don't know what they're thinking. It's crazy time. All right, that brings us to the end of part 1 here. In part 2, which is for subscribers, the antidote to this insanity, I provide and we talk about direct steps that you can take right now to persevere and potentially prosper through what's ahead. And to be part of the solution versus among those still contributing to the catastrophes requires you to take action. Yeah, it's entirely possible that ecosystem collapse will render whole new swaths of the globe uninhabitable to humans. But by all means, buy as much Uber and Lyft stock as you can. But if you do, be sure to chug down a whole fistful of crazy pills first, all right? Hey, everybody, I'm Chris Martinson. Thank you so much for listening. Please check out the site to find part 2, where we go into the antidote to this insanity. Thank you for listening.